Dr. Hillary Cauthen. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
So great to have you on. Dr. Hillary, for our listeners who may not be familiar with you and your work, who are you and what do you do?
So I am a clinical sports psychologist. I work on what I say like the continuum of care for my high performers. So some suffering with mental illness, mental health symptomology, all the way to the performance optimization, that mental wellness. We have a team here in Austin. I have a practice. 7 other practitioners work for me in the office. And so really working with teams, individual athletes, the community, just to really help these individuals thrive. Beyond that, I'm an author, a podcaster, a mom of 4, avid coffee drinker and nap taker, so those are always fun to add in.
I think a mama, 4, and coffee drinker kind of go hand in hand, right?
Yeah.
We'll touch on coffee in a moment, but the reason why we asked you to come on is for this awesome book, Hello Trauma, Our Invisible Teammate. What a cool name, Hello Trauma. I mean,
Mhm.
when I first saw the book, I'm like, wow, it just caught you. And I love the picture up front. So first off, how did you get into sports psychology and where did your focus on trauma come?
So I think very common to a lot of practitioners in the field. I was a really good athlete as a youth and a collegiate athlete. And I had this kind of funny experience when I was 14. We moved to this small town in Maine. I used to live outside of St. Louis, Missouri. Moved to a small town in Maine. And a lot of the resources weren't there. And so sport to me kind of changed in the landscape where it became very easy and I was winning really easy. And the expectations of my success was, like, really, like, there, but I was also really bored with just having it be so easy. So I kinda was like, "Man, I just wish I had someone who I could talk to that really understood the competitive landscape and the competitive mind." The funny part is my mom is a counselor, so I had plenty of resources to go talk to someone. It just wasn't the same. I knew I wanted someone who was really specialized in the kinesiology and the competitive aspect of sport, and so at 14, it sparked my passion. That's what I was gonna do, and I went on to undergrad and my grad school and really got an encompassing training to be on that continuum of care model. And during my undergraduate studies, I started just listening and exploring, like, kind of what was happening in sport and my own personal experience from being a youth athlete to a collegiate athlete, that I knew that sport also had this dark side. And I sat there and I listened for years, right? From 2002 when I first started studying until about 2018. And that's like 16 years of just listening and observing and being in different cultures and organizations. And I was tired of hearing people talking behind closed doors and the whispers about the bad side of sport, and I was like, "You know what? Like, I'm gonna just, like, start talking about this. Like, we need to
Mhm.
change this landscape." As beautiful as sport is and all the positive things that we know it can be capable of building, there's a side that just is not great, and it's really detrimental, and it was detrimental to me personally as an athlete, to teammates, to things that I witnessed. I had become a mom, and I was like, "What environment am I gonna put my kid in? Do I trust this? Is this gonna be safe for them?" And then I started seeing, like, some darker side, and so it allowed me in 2018 to really use my voice with my TEDx talk,
Mhm.
and that was the first time I think I publicly decided to own and talk about the things that people don't talk about in a way that shaped the next trajectory of the 6 years into, like, really understanding trauma in a different way and putting words to the meaning behind it.
So the word trauma, how do you define trauma?
Yeah, that's the best part of this book. I like to take the pop culture, big T, little t stuff out of it, and I really like to just call it what it is. It's a physiological response that occurs and our brain makes meaning of it. No different than like you stub your toe, you witness a car accident, like it's all trauma. It's all on this framework of what happens and our brain processes that stimulus. It's the meaning behind that that we have to dig into. And I think that's where people get it confused, right? Trauma itself is just an immediate impact from something that occurred.
You say immediate impact. And also you write in the book, 70% of all adults have experienced trauma.
And that's just what's reported for sure, right? 70% in the US reported trauma. And imagine like those that haven't reported it or those that
Uh,
are living with people that experience it. We have vicarious trauma. I mean, we know globally in 2020 when the pandemic hit for COVID, we've all experienced some level of trauma at some sort.
I think the other 30% just don't leave their houses.
Yeah. Or
You know
they're
what
like,
I
I'm
mean?
gonna just call it something different, you know?
Trauma, it could be as crazy as a plane crash, or it could be like you think you just got downsized, right? All of that falls into can fall into the category of trauma, right? It could be you could
Yeah.
break your leg in the middle of your senior year in college or high school, and that could be traumatic, right? Trauma takes on many forms, correct?
Absolutely, and that's where I said it really comes down to the emotional meaning we make of the experience, and then how that impacts the rest of our life, our social experiences, the way we show up in places, and so to your point, yeah, it could be an athlete who has a season-ending injury, to the loss of a job, to X, Y, or Z, right? Things that really just change the landscape of what people thought their livelihood was gonna be.
Different people have different mindsets where you have someone who is really resilient and they can blow their knee out and then they are attacking it and 10 months later they're better than ever. Then they have others that never recover from that, right? So when you're working with your clients, how do you determine how fast and far you can push them? And to say like say you have two clients that have the same situation and one is say thriving in a short period of regrouping and they're going and there's someone else that's stuttering and maybe just can't get over the hump. How do you deal with those two with the same exact situation and that maybe they're handling differently? How do you handle that as a practitioner?
Partly comes back to relationship, right? The relationship I have with each of them. And it doesn't have to go back to duration, right? I don't have to have worked with someone for a year and a half and then they experience this injury and now I'm with someone with 3 months, right? For me, it's the way I practice in general is so much with empathy and care, but I'm also direct because they came to me for a reason, right? I'm here to help them get better. Like I kind of put myself out of a job. I try to flip the script a little bit and tell them that they can still come to me when they're doing great. But for those injured athletes, if they both tore an ACL, what we look at when people get stuck in the healing process and the process to work through that, it's either fear based, right? And they haven't addressed the fear. We can look at lack of social support around them and other things that are maybe contributing. We sometimes have like dual dichotomy of like different symptomologies, and maybe they actually have a little bit of depression that flared up, or isolation, or some poor coping skills arose and they weren't prepared to handle the obstacles. I also think a lot of our individual athletes who look like they're thriving so well and are putting in all the physical work, and we're like, oh, they came back so fast. I also question, did they do the work? Did they emotionally actually respond to what happened to them? Oftentimes, those athletes want to minimize and not respond to the emotional impact that that injury just took toll of. And they're so focused on just, let me get back to the normalcy of grinding and being on the field. That can be detrimental later on. So it's a tricky thing of which phase of healing are you at? Do you handle the emotional stuff first? And so the recovery phase is a little bit slower? Or do you handle the emotional stuff later and we see that show up after they get back to the field?
I think you start the book with this. When you talk about that particular type of person that has something traumatic and acts like nothing happened. I think the first two words of the book is it's been resolved.
Mhm.
Right? And you go into a big write-up. You speak to that two-letter word is way, maybe way too small to define what happened and what it meant to them, and maybe they're dealing with something behind the scenes. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, I think when anyone who's experienced something traumatic and they've identified it and called it trauma, putting it in a little thing and saying this one thing, it happened to me, right? It's never just one thing. Trauma is a ripple approach, and the way it attacks are is one simple thing happens, but then six other things come up from that and impact us and change the process of things, and we lose other things and emotionally have to work through stuff. And so saying it's been resolved, meaning the experience itself, the event has moved on and there is some sort of resolution. Well, okay, but then what's next? What about all the other stuff that happened? What about how that person felt during this time frame? How did they get back to normalcy? If there was like a physical thing that existed, did they actually heal? Right. Like, so if the it is a knee surgery and you had your surgery, we're good. Like it's so much more than that. I really feel a lot of people have not been trained or talk about the emotional aspects in general of how do we process emotions. And so that's why when these big things happen, we get stuck in it and we just want to minimize, but yeah, we're good. Let's move on to the next thing. Let me get back to normalcy. And that's the shame of impacting your healing.
You mentioned too also about trauma. It hijacks our mind. It's ugly. It's everywhere, and it's hard for us sometimes to look at ourselves or with someone else. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think people love to go to have coffee and be like, let's talk about all the crap you just went through and tell me all your trauma, right? We definitely aren't like naturally engaging in these conversations. And partly because we don't know how to have them. We don't know how to talk openly. We don't know how to listen. It's a scary topic because, like, that negative emotion and the sad emotion charge is like, "Oh, that's too hard for me to handle myself. I definitely can't handle it with someone else." And so, that's one of my beautiful lines of thinking about how trauma hijacks your mind because the person going through something, their brain is not thinking as clear as it once did. They're rerunning the loop in their mind, and they're reliving vicariously the things that existed to them, and they're stuck in it. it's confusing and disorienting for someone to be like, okay, what's real and what's not real? Like, how do I move through this? How am I supposed to feel this way? And so trauma is really messy for people who've gone through it. And it's definitely not something that people are welcoming in to say, let me help you and help you heal through this.
There are situations where people just don't want to discuss it. A friend of mine's, they had one of their pets passed away a year or two back, and ran into this person at a party. And I haven't seen him since it happened. I'm like, hey, so sorry. What a great dog. And he looked at me and said, I can't talk about it right now. Like instead of saying, oh, thanks so much, appreciate you. Like he just cut me off and says, I can't talk about it. Happened a month before I saw him and didn't even want to talk about it. Like, he didn't even want me to acknowledge that it happened. Didn't want me to say I was sorry to hear. Like, I just felt like being a good friend for 5 seconds. Like it was all I do is bring it up for 5 seconds saying, so
Hmm.
sorry. And it kind of threw me like, wow, like a month later, they can't even like acknowledge, say, hey, thanks, appreciate it. They cut you off midway where that's a trauma, right? That they
Hmm.
just weren't ready to discuss what in public yet, right? I guess you got to
Yeah.
respect that and move on and just
And even hearing this story, right? It's a beautiful example because I talk about it later in the book is our immediate responses want to what we think is showing empathy can sometimes be perceived as sympathy, right? Being like, I'm
yes.
sorry this for you, right? Where we don't know what he wanted to hear. Clearly, he was, like, in the denial, minimizing phase that I talk about because that was a really hard loss for him, and it was who knows what stories he's had with his dog and what he shared with him, what that meant to him,
Mm.
and so it's like, what's the best wording to show your friends that you care about them, but also not intrude and make meaning or make it less than by certain words, and so I try to teach people in the book, like, how you can show up differently for people and have different wording to make people say, "Hey, like, I'm here for you if you need that."
Yeah. So there's three ways you talk about dealing with trauma. You bring up three different types: the minimizer, the enabler, and the moral authority. If
Mhm.
you could just briefly touch on each one, what's a minimizer?
Yeah, so this is what we we all go through when someone who first immediately experienced something. They want to pretend it didn't exist. It's not that bad. Like they're okay. Let's move on. I'm going to go about my normal life. They minimize the experience and the meaning behind what event had occurred. Then we go into this enabler, and the enabler is someone who tries to take ownership and meaning for they must have had a fault in this. It must have been their fault for this event or trauma to occur. So if we look at a victim of sexual assault, sometimes they get stuck with the socialization of, "Oh, I was wearing something, or I shouldn't have been out late by myself, or I put myself in this environment and I drank too much," things of that we hear society making meaning of as well. They're like being like, "Oh, it must have been my fault in some way that this existed." And then they maybe go back to the minimization and you fluctuate between these kind of zones. And the last one, the moral authority, this is your superhero, right? This is the one who comes in and rescues you and says, "Hey, something happened to you and it's not okay, and let's help you get better," right? It's kind of either fighting for justice or helping you get through a healing phase. It's really the action and the catalyst to now push you into, let's help you go heal.
And that's if you're ready or not, right? Like you might not be there yet, and they're forcing you. It's almost like the opposite of the minimizer, where
Yeah,
like something
absolutely.
goes
Right.
bad, and you're like, I am jacked up because this happened, and I'm mentally not good, or maybe physically, or both not good. I don't worry about it. You're fine. It happened to me. I did that 20 years
Yeah.
ago, and I'm fine. Like you should just get got through it.
Yeah.
That's the minimizer, right? And then
Mhm.
the moral authority is like, oh, dude, I think I'm okay now. Then you're going about your day, and they're like, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you
Yeah.
sure you're okay? And like, and after like the 17th, "Are you okay?" You start thinking about it again and they get in your head, like, "Get out of here. I'm fine." It's easy,
Yeah.
it's something like that, right?
Yeah, and then you're like, "Wait a minute, like, I'm
Yeah.
really not okay." Like,
Yeah,
let me
maybe I'm
actually,
not
like, take
okay.
some time.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
start getting self-conscious. Maybe am
Yeah.
I giving out vibes that I'm not okay? And trauma to me is like a big word. Again, it's like a plane
Mhm.
crash to like your girlfriend breaks up with you. It's and everywhere in between. Sometimes you have some friends that never want to stop talking about it. And
Mhm.
maybe they blame whatever's in their life, if it's directly related or not related, they blame everything on that. Or they never want to talk about it. And
Yeah.
it's like they act like it never happened, right? You have like two different sides of the coin, right? Like, how do you handle that as a clinician where where you have the extremes?
Yeah, I think, part me is, like, helping them understand how their brain processes things. So, the one who's always talking about it, they're like our external processor. They have to talk out loud because they're trying to make meaning of it. And so the more they can talk about it, it can, like they'll hear it differently, they'll make sense of it, and they'll be able to process that in a different way. Those ones seem a little bit more likely to like, okay, we're gonna get somewhere, we're gonna make some change, let's work through this. At some point, we're gonna say, okay, how are you living your life if you keep running this story the whole time? let's get off the treadmill and go on the elliptical for a little bit and try something different.
Mhm.
The internal processors, that's a little bit more difficult, right? They're closing things off, they're trying to shut down, they're trying to minimize, they're repressing emotions. And you really have to look at, is this healthy, right? Both can be extreme and not healthy in either way, right? And so I always look at, how are you coping if you're not going to talk about it? How are you working through things on your own? Do you journal? Do you meditate? Do you have a life that's actually making you feel fulfilled and you've processed and able to heal? Because, you can't just put a band-aid on it and keep moving on and expect the scar not to heal nicely.
Sure. And you brought the word up journal. It's funny. Last episode I posted with Derek Sivers. He's an author, has a ton of books. And of the 160 guests I probably had on the podcast, I bet the act of journaling has come up like 50 times with 50 different guests. And they're all over, from like in the military to authors to CEOs of companies to moms that beat cancer. The power of journaling, where you get a book, a blank page, and write what you're thinking or what's on your mind or what's in your head. And you write a couple notes down and get it from your head and put it on paper. It's so powerful. Why do you think
Yeah.
that's so powerful?
I mean, it's part of our learning, right? We encode messages if we learn better if we like hear it and write it and then we can see it and read those words, right? You're releasing something. It's actually a physical release when you can put words to paper. But I get a little bit creative. Like not everyone likes to write and not everyone's good with typing. And so I say, look, if you're a voice memoir,
Mm.
do an audio message, create an audio journal. Like you don't have to physically write because it doesn't fit in your schedule. Like if you're driving down the car and you want to just click on like the record button, talk out loud. Just talk to yourself out there. The whole point is to put your thoughts out there in a space that allows you to kind of see it and feel it and make meaning of it and get it out of your head. And so that reflective practice is so huge. If you have prompts because you're like, how do I just write? Like get some prompts.
Mm.
And if you don't need to do prompts, then I suggest like talk about your day and write through it. But the hard part is, are we actually intentional in making this a habit versus a one time or one off thing? If you really want the work, then you have to be more consistent about doing it.
And you would think, like, coming from Philly, being Italian, like I train martial arts, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. You would think like journaling would be like the last thing you would hear someone from Philly who grew up like in an old school Italian household and trains martial arts. The journal, if I ever want to chill out for 5 minutes, nothing chills me out more than just writing a couple notes down in a blank journal. It
Yeah.
just, I don't know what it is. Like, it's just everything, like the temperature mentally decreases. I just calm down and
Mhm.
I'm like, you know what? It's going to be all right. It's like 10
Yeah.
minutes, not like 5 hours, like 10 minutes
Right.
writing 5, 6 sentences, and it's not for publication. It's not Marcus Aurelius. I don't think someone's gonna read it 1,000 years from now and get guidance from it. It's just for me to take it out of my head, put it on paper, and just like, you know what? Everything's gonna be all right, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's almost like, and there's no judgment here, but it's almost like we all have a friend or two that at the end of the day, they need a drink, or they need a beer, or they gotta have a glass of wine at the end of the night to
Mhm.
relax. I can get that same thing with opening a book and writing a few lines down on a journal. I get that same calm, relaxation, chill, like getting through the day. Does that make
Yeah.
sense with the journal?
Absolutely. And I
Yeah.
tell people, like, you just need 5
Mm.
minutes. 5
That's
minutes
all.
a
Yeah.
day, and
Lazy.
the neurons in your mind are gonna change. You're gonna actually what happens is neurologically, like, it doesn't make our amygdala, I call her Amy, right? She doesn't get stimulus, she doesn't get crazy. You are allowing clarity and creativity and calmness to show up by taking 5 minutes to be still.
You speak about in the book the 7 steps to dealing with trauma.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go by each step. So, all right, something happened, right? Trauma.
Mhm.
It's not bad enough where the person's dead. So it's trauma where the person's still alive and trying to get through it, right?
Yeah.
So it's that first step. And you can comment after each step. How about this? Acknowledge that something happened. Sounds so
This
big,
is this sounds
so
okay,
crazy.
these steps, you're gonna be like,
That's
"This
crazy.
sounds like common sense." I'm like,
Yeah.
"Yes, but we're not doing it."
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
sure.
the simple acknowledging that this actually occurred, you're not making meaning, you're not saying who's right or wrong or whatever, you're just saying, "Hey, like, I know this happened to you. Like, I hear that this happened to you, and I'm here for you, and let's help you work through this." And that in itself takes away the emotion, takes away the defensiveness, allows someone to be presently in the space with them, and then have a clearer mind to say, "Okay, like, what do we need to do to work through something?"
The second one is so strong and powerful, and you would think it'd be so common, but common sense isn't common with just about the whole population, me included. Second step, seek feedback and consult experts.
When you work through something and you say like, "Hey, I know this happened to you. listen, get feedback and say, what is it that you need?
Mhm.
How can I help you? How can we show up for you? And then know that you do not have to be the expert in the room to fix it or solve it. Like, figure out who are the people, who are my team that can now allow this to be better, and find those people and either give them a resource or work them through yourself and consult with them to then know what's my next steps.
Step number 3, conduct a conversation with care with everyone involved and actually
So
talk
this
about it. Go ahead.
Yeah, this one is really important. And I say with care because if you're an organization and you have an employee that comes to you and said, "Hey, another employee is sexually harassing me," right? In that role, you acknowledge something has happened to that person. You're like, "I hear you. Help me understand what's going on. Give me the feedback. Let me now go consult with the people I need to help fix this." In that phase, you now also have another employee that you have to have a conversation with as well. And your role is not the investigator. Your role is to say that these are both humans and they both are reporting things, and I have to treat them with care because emotionally they're going through stuff as well. And even if I have my own biases that what I hear had occurred is wrong and it's painful and it's terrible, I am not the judge and authority to go in and make that justice call. All I'm gonna do is acknowledge it happened, have a conversation with care with the human, seek information, and provide that support. And so you have to remember in all of this that everyone is a human and everyone deserves respect and care, even when wrongs have occurred. We still can have the care to help people work through things and to get the help that's needed, even when there's consequences that are there that need to be implemented.
That's so important. Everyone is a human. Everyone's got feelings. Everyone has a backstory. Everyone has like a story in their head why something happened, but you got to conduct it with respect, right? And a lot of empathy. That's so many times when it's a heated thing that does happen, it's real easy to take a side and jump off to the other side, right? Maybe
Right.
too way too soon. The fourth step, ask, and I love this one, ask people what they need. And they may need time or space or resources, but I know I'm guilty of this where I'll have someone on my team say, I'll make it up, my mom died. You can say, oh, take
Mhm.
all the time you need, right? Take all the time you need. They might not want time.
Yes.
They might want to keep their routine, right? They don't want to take 3 weeks off. They might want to take a day off and get back to what they do to keep them busy. Can you speak to that? What you've seen?
Yeah, and I love you gave that example, and I'll give a more recent one. Because I speak about trauma and part of a crisis response team, with the plane crash that occurred with over DC of the plane and the helicopter that occurred, I got involved. A member of their team was on the plane, and she's the boss of this company, and she's like, I wanna keep living my life. I wanna keep working. I wanna I'm active on social media and I wanna post these things. And it's not that she was not empathetic or affected by the death. She very much was. This was a colleague of 23 years. But part of my conversations with her were, you need to do what's best for you. And what's best for you might not be taking time. We can't assume that, right? And you shouldn't have to apologize for how your grieving process looks like. This is what you need as long as you're working through that. And so this point of ask, don't assume is really essential because we're so socialized to just avoid certain topics and say, okay, time off. Like, let me hide you. Let me isolate you. We call it this invisible teammate. Go over here and fix it yourself. That may not be what they need. You might be their social support, their normalcy, their routines that allow them to be alive and function and work through stuff. And so it's the most impactful thing I've heard from anyone in organizations, especially related to death, is maybe I should ask them, when do you want to come back? How can we support you? What you need versus just immediately being like, take as much time as you want, because that's been a game changer for a ton of people.
Is that what you call empathetic engagement? Is that what you call that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Empathetic engagement. Absolutely. You're placing yourself in their feelings and you're engaging in their emotions and you're helping understand it's very different than just like walking in their shoes. You're actually saying, let me engage in this emotional process with you so I can understand it better.
Makes sense. How about the fifth step? Create a plan of action, but do it together.
Yes.
You-
So oftentimes people just make a plan and they're like, here you go. Here's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
Well, the person who went through it,
Yeah.
they might have a totally different idea of what they need and be like, what are you talking about? That's what you're going to do. This is not going to help me. It's not going to help the situation. This is terrible. And so I always say you need collaborative care. You need collaborative care to work through together to actually make this be effective.
Then the sixth step, discuss the action steps and implement them, but keep each other updated, right? I know I'm guilty of this where my wife will say, hey, we got to do this. I'm like, I did half of it today. She says, you didn't tell me a thing. Like I'm just so in my head. And like I didn't tell her like I'm halfway done and she thinks I didn't even start it yet. And keep people updated, right?
Well, and it's especially important for the person who's reported something that happened, right? Because there already emotionally affected. They're trying to heal through whatever it is that they went through, and they need grounding factors. They need tangible items they can hold on to, and they need these markers of time. And so oftentimes the people that are trying to fix things are like, yeah, they've done 6 steps, but there's no communication back to them. So the person waiting is literally waiting, assuming nothing is being done. And that's really detrimental to the well-being of the individual.
I took a note here. It says, paraphrasing, you say hope is not a strategy, but hope is part of the healing process, right? And people need something to look forward to, right?
Yeah. We all do, right? Like, even like, sometimes my kids, I'm like, "They're so bright." Like, we were driving the other day, and my kid was like, if you don't have hope, you don't have happiness." And I was like, "Where did you get that beautiful gem?"
Yeah.
But they must be listening to things that I'm saying. But it's true, like, we get stuck if we don't have something to look forward to, and hope is when you think of the emotion, the idea of it, it seems very, light and freeing and powerful and exciting to go towards, and so we need to give that to people.
And then you speak of, I thought this was pretty cool. First time I ever heard this term, emotional hygiene,
Yeah.
right? As you say, as you have maybe a yearly physical, you should have a
Mhm.
yearly mental physical. Go ahead, go speak to
Yeah.
that.
I mean, think about it. Like, so in the US, for sure, right? From 0 to 18, we're socialized to take our children to the pediatrician for a well
Mhm.
check.
Yep.
Cool. We get their shots, their vaccines, what do they need to do, their physicals to do sports, make sure their body's aligned. After 18, we're like, yeah, figure out yourself. And everyone's good and does what they do.
On your own.
But we don't do that for the mental and emotional well-being. Now they've gotten better. There's some screeners that the pediatrician might put in place that you check box. Do you have these symptomologies? That's a good step, but to me, the parent or the individual is not gonna actually check the box there because they don't want other people to feel like something's wrong with them because we haven't socialized this as normal and
Mhm.
here's how it's gonna help you. And I think we should do mental wellness check-ins. We should provide mental wellness like support and saying, "Hey, like, how are you feeling? Here's a cool event to do, and let me teach you some coping stuff," and integrate social skills and emotional training in the schools, helping people know what are our 6 primary emotions we feel and train people to learn how to cope. I mean, the mental and emotional are 2/3 of what our bodies are going through, and they impact our physical well-being, and they impact our health, and so we have to start flipping the script and teaching people how to take care of themselves.
You speak to the differences between, we spoke a few minutes earlier about the empathetic engagement, but then you also need accountable action. So you
Mhm.
got to show empathy, but you got to hold people accountable. Like, where's that line drawn? Like, how do you draw that line?
Yeah, I think the biggest misstep is we actually don't have accountable action. We don't have action where people are actually doing what they say they're gonna do. We might empathize and say, "Oh, I know this happened to you and this is really hard." But then there's no justification, there's no action, there's no next step, there's no change to make sure it doesn't happen again. So there might be something that was fixed in the moment for a person, but you're not changing the system to not have it happen again. And so we see it repeatedly happen again and again. And this is where I say, well, now we have a toxic environment. Now we're not
Yeah.
creating a space that is safe for people.
Tell me if you think this is the same thing. Like, as a leader, you can't be all care and no candor, but you can't be all candor with no care.
Right?
Right? You can't, because if you're just all care and no candor, you're just like a caregiver. Like, you're just like the Red Cross. Like, you nothing's coming back and you're just serving, and they might like you, but they probably won't respect you. But then if you're all candor and no care, you're like a drill sergeant, you're going to lose the whole room. You might be good for one season, maybe with the veteran team, and they're just going to
Right.
revolt and just throw you out the door the next year, right? They're just going to
Hmm.
stop listening to you. So you kind of have to draw that line between care and candor, right?
Yeah. And I think that's a beautiful explanation. This is where I always tell people, it's like, I love sport. And I'm not saying that you have to be like, oh, warm and fuzzy and like everyone's best friend is. No, the standard in sport is to win. That is the standard. The standard should be excellence. But how you go about teaching that and how you create an environment to get there can be with care and curiosity and empathy and engagement while still having accountability of this is what I expect for you to be successful. It can
Yeah.
be both things.
Can you speak to the difference between culture and climate?
Oh, well, to me, like the way I view this, right? The culture is an encompassing component of the environment in itself. The climate is like in its current state,
Yeah.
right? So we might have a culture that we believe in, these philosophies and values, and this is what is so important to us, and the people make up what that is, but it switches based on who those people are in the room.
Yeah.
And so I can still have the values of accountability and hard work and empathy, but how that looks and how that shows up is really based on the climate, the current group you're working with. But it doesn't mean that the culture will have to shift. We just have to kind of work through that process of who's showing up in our space, and then how do we have that be implemented? And it can look differently based on the climate itself.
Here's three things I learned, like watching your TED talk, reading the book. Here's three concepts related to what we're speaking of. You speak of the power of finding people that are doing the work that you want to do at a high level. And you give two things: connect with them, but not just connect with them, you got to learn from them. And
Mhm.
that is so powerful. And
Mm.
especially in this day and age where you don't have to know Tony Robbins, ever meet Tony Robbins, come within 100 miles of Tony Robbins. But there's so much content that he has online, or Tim Ferriss, or Seth Godin, Ryan Holiday. You could follow them online, read their books, follow their courses, do the work that they put out into the world, follow it, take notes and learn from it. And you can connect with their work and learn from it. And you're at a whole different spot where not only do you have to find the people, but you have to learn from them and actually then put it in action, right?
Yeah. And I think this is where people get stuck, especially the high performers, right? And I ask a lot of people on a podcast I do, like I interview a lot of successful athletes and I ask them like, is it easier to be striving for success or is it easier to be like the underdog and like failure and have to chase something, right? Like, do you like to win or do you like to kind of be chasing? And most of them like to be the one chasing, right?
Mhm.
Which they get to go after something. But the ones that are used to being on top and thrive in being on top, they're my learners because it's really hard to stay successful. And if you think about the New England Patriots when they went on their run forever, and then we saw Kansas City Chiefs until your Phillies just beat them. But there is a culture of winning and staying successful year after year after year is very difficult. But the ones that do it are because they're learning and they're around people that want to keep learning and they want to push themselves better and they're not getting stuck. And so I think there is this component of you have to continuously be a learner in order to push yourself to the next level.
Yeah, is always be learning. Like even if it's like that micro learn, like training jujitsu, my mat's behind me. I train Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and you're never going to have this grand day where you're going to go from where you are to 5 levels up. But each day, wow, I learned a certain way to break a grip. I learned a certain way to stop a choke. And like one particular choke, I learned to stop it from one direction. And you leave the academy that day, like I got better today. I got one little micro move that got me better, and you go 2, 3 times a week and you got 2 or 3 little micro moves that get you better. At the end of the year, you're 50, 60 little micro moves better and your game's at another level, right?
Mhm.
And it's just like
Yeah.
you want to take that little micro learning each day. And like you said, that 5 minutes you mentioned a few minutes ago,
Mhm.
that slow little step each day. And you might not see any difference in 2, 3 weeks, but you do that for 2, 3 years. I think you're unrecognizable from who you
Yeah.
were 2 years before.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really great. Here's two other big picture things I learned from the book and reading your stuff we could speak about. Big question in the process. No matter where you are, who you're dealing with, the kind of trauma you're going through, where you are, what is my role right now in this moment? Not
Mhm.
what you were a year ago, not what you want to be, but right now in this moment, in this situation. What's the importance of defining your role right now in the moment you're in?
I think we're so used to just looking at the next thing and chasing that and working through it, or we get stuck. I call it either wasted worries, where
Yep.
we're stuck in the
Yeah.
past and it's wasted. Can't do anything about it, Or we have these future fears and we're like constantly getting ahead of ourselves. I'm like, what's the right now mindset? Right now, in this mindset, in this present moment, what are you in control of? When you bring people back down and say, okay, this is my role right now, it's actually way more simple, and a lot of the worries dissipate because in that immediate time frame and currently where they're at, they might be like, "Oh, actually, I'm okay. I'm supposed to just be. I'm supposed to just sit here, right? Or I'm supposed to listen, or I'm supposed to maybe I am supposed to be doing in that moment, but that's okay. This is what I have to do right now." And it slows everything down and it brings you back to like one thing, that right now focus, and then things become a lot more in control. And so I try to kind of eliminate all the wasted worries and the future fears and say, right now, what's my role? What do I need to do? And then ground themselves in that present place and realize that they have a lot more time and their emotions can be more in control in that space.
Yeah, and you tie that question, what's your role in the moment right now? And the next thing you just mentioned it, what's the one thing I need to do right now in this moment?
Mhm.
And if you
Yeah.
keep that mindset, right? What's my role and what's the next move? What's the most important thing for me to do right now?
Yeah.
That keeps you in the present. And the
Yeah.
best life's in the present, right? Because you think
Mhm.
about the past and you have any problems, I guess it's called depression. And if you think of the future and you get scared, I can't believe I got this coming up, I'm worried, that's anxiety, right? So
Right.
crush anxiety, crush this depression. Just think of right here, right now. What do you have to do in this moment? And each moment, all you're thinking about what I have to do right now, that just puts you in a great spot. That's just a great place to
Yeah.
live your life, I think. Don't you think?
Yeah. And, there's so many ways you can practice this, right? But it allows you to just be literally mindfully engaged in that aspect. And a lot of the worries actually dissipate. And then you're like, oh, actually, I feel pretty okay right now. Like I'm,
Yeah,
I'm feeling
sure.
good. And I have control to do whatever I have to do next.
Because you always have what you need in that moment to take care of business. 'Cause you're worried about, oh, this happens, that happens. What am I going to do? But when you're going to greet the future with the tools you have at the moment, you'll be fine. Right? Whatever comes at you, you're going to be fine. You're going to deal with it like you dealt with the other 6,000 things you dealt with in the past, right? And you're still
Yeah.
stay on. That's great. And it's so funny. This all sounds so basic, what we spoke of, so common sense, but it's like so backed by science. And I'm pretty sure that you forget the basic things. Like, why is basic common knowledge or basic next step so hard for the average human?
I think we try to make it more complex and difficult than it has to be. Like
Mm.
it's not rocket science, right? Like we have six primary emotions. Really, it's very simple. Universally, there's six emotions that we all experience. We can make them on a continuum way more or less, but at the very root of it, like you have joy. Okay, we have sadness, we have anger.
Sounds like
And
the
so it
movie. Was
seems
it Inside Out? What's that movie? Inside
yes.
Out?
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It is. They built them on the primary emotions. It was a beautiful movie.
Yeah.
But I think we make it bigger than it is because it seems too easy if it's simple. And we at the root of like, how do I have to live my life, right? I have to sleep, I have to eat, and I have to move my body. And then I should socialize with people.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should do those things. You cognitively engage yourself. And we don't have to make it more than it is. We have to go back to the basics. And if you take care of the basics, you will live better. If you sleep well, if you move your body, if you're constantly engaging in something and connecting to humans, you will live a healthy lifestyle.
So true. That's a great movie. You notice most of those emotions, though, like in the movie, I was watching with my daughter. Mostly are negative. There's not too many. There's like happiness might be the only. I might be wrong here, but the happiness
No,
might be the
yeah,
only positive one, right?
yeah, it's
Everything's
beautiful.
like sadness and whatever it is, depression. They're all like anger, like they're all
Sad, anger,
fear.
anxiety,
Yeah,
disgust,
yeah. They're
fear.
all like everyone's negative except one. It's so crazy what the human
Yeah.
mind does to itself. You think there'd be six or seven good ones and one bad one. It's the other way around, right?
Well, and this is what I teach people because I'm like, you don't wake up happy. Happy is the same emotion as anger or sad or fear. Like, we have to do things in order to experience the emotion. We have to put ourselves in a place to feel happiness. But at the end of the day, you only feel an emotion for 90 seconds. Like, it's gone. We only just keep thinking and reliving that to feel the thing. So I tell people, like, you have a lot more control than you realize in how you want to feel.
Yeah, it's so true. A lot more agency than we like. And here's one random thought. I think you said this when we wrote this in the book. And I thought this is just a great line for the book. Always remember you're a human being speaking to another human being. All you have to do is sit and listen. And it's so
Yeah.
hard at times. All right. And usually people just love to talk, very little listening. It should be the opposite, right? You should be more listening, more speaking. Why is it so hard just to sit and listen to another human being?
I think two things. People unconsciously are getting in their own way because they're trying to relate. They want to connect. So they're going to share their story of something to connect to the other person to make it feel like they're empathetically engaging and be like, I hear you. But now's not the time to share your story. Now's
Yeah.
not the time to relate in any way. And we see that all the
All the
time. All the
time.
time, someone's like, oh, this happened here. It's not about you.
Yeah.
And listening, we're not taught to listen. We're not
Mm.
taught to sit and hear. And sometimes I think it's like, if you don't have your own emotional hygiene and one way to cope with your own emotions, hearing someone else's story, that can be pretty we have vicarious trauma. That can be pretty hard to hear and not know what to do about it. You feel helpless. So oftentimes the person listening is like, in order for them to get rid of their anxiety, they're like, let me go do something. Let me fix this. Let me help you. And it's like, no, no, they don't need that either.
Yeah.
Right now, they just need you to listen.
It's not about you. It's so true because it's so easy if someone's, I got in a car accident and I hurt my leg. Oh, I was in a car accident. Like they don't care that you were in a car accident 6 months ago or a year ago or 10 years ago. Like you just want to say, oh my gosh, how are you? Like,
Yes.
tell me
Like, are
about,
you
how do you
okay? Like,
feel?
what
Are you
happened?
okay?
Yeah.
What happened? What are you going to do now? How's your car? Like who was in the car with you? Like they just want to hear that. They don't want to hear like, let me tell you about my mom's car accident. And they talk about their mom's car accident for 20 minutes. Like it's crazy. Human beings, it's just, we're our own worst enemies at times. It's so,
Yep.
wanted to wrap up here with a couple fun questions we
Yeah.
ask everyone who comes on the show. It's called the Share Your Secrets, so our listeners can get to know you a bit more as a person.
Yeah.
So you're a sports psychologist. I mean, you work with professional athletes, colleges, big time players. When you need to calm your mind or recharge your body, what do you do?
So I love music. Music is a gateway to my emotional well-being. So I put on different music to feel different emotions and feelings, get me in a different space. I take naps probably every day. I try to every day. It's like a
Nice.
go-to to help me recharge and feel good. Bubble baths, that is a definite recharger for me. I need that nightly. But yes, I really need to just get a little kickstart. Like music's the way to go. Like we have random dance parties in the kitchen with my kids. Like it's just like a vibe. Like we'll be driving in the car and we're like, let's switch it up, man. Like music is just the best thing for me for sure.
Who's on your Spotify playlist? If you need the vibe, who you listening to?
Oh, it changes all the time. So we have like Connor Price, Vincent Boone, but then I might flip it up to maybe I do have a little rap, so I'll throw that in there. I go old school sometimes and like some really good ballads, like
Mm.
Adele. You can't go wrong with that
Yeah,
one if I need to jam
absolutely.
out. But the alternative mixes of good stuff, like I just switched up. I'm a very every day I could change up what I'm feeling.
Nah, it's so cool. Let's touch on naps real quick. And I see the data, like a 20-minute nap is gold
Mhm.
during the day. Like you're more alert. It's better than coffee. Maybe you have a little coffee before you fall asleep and wake
Yes,
up and
the
you're
espresso nap.
espresso nap.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I think Dan Pink, I don't know if you're Daniel Pink, he wrote about that. He shared some studies in one of his books where
Yep.
you sip some coffee, then take your 20-minute nap and wake
Mhm.
up and you got the nap plus the coffee and you're like, let's go,
Yep.
andiamo. Like let's roll.
Yep.
But naps, why is that considered such weakness? Like I remember if I was little, if I fell asleep, I was in college, I fell asleep. Oh, you sleeping? What are you taking? It's condescending if you took a 20-minute nap in the middle of the day. Like
Yeah,
slacker.
because you're not supposed to be tired, you're not
Yeah.
supposed to, like, stop, like, that feels like you're not, like, completing something, right? I have switched the script for my girls, like, they know, like, they're like, "Are we napping today? When are we napping? Let's go I wanna go take a nap with you." Like, when it's my on the weekends, I'm like, "Alright, who's gonna take a nap with me?" They're like, "I am," and, like, rush into the house to take a nap. It's I was trained that way. Thankfully, my college coach told me to take a nap because it allowed my body to rest,
Yep.
recharge, and be
Absolutely.
able to perform better. And sometimes if you can't sleep, just slowing your brain down for the 20 minutes allows you to be in a different emotional state. So naps, I'm telling you, that is a game changer.
I've heard a couple podcasts that someone said the ultimate PED, performance enhancing drug, is sleep. It's
Yeah.
the most ultimate performance enhancing. You want to enhance your performance. It's so good. Now, thanks for sharing that. How about this? Every author I ever met are big readers. What book the most changed your mind or impacted your life? You
The
had a
Tao of Pooh.
really tell me about it.
Yeah. You know, I actually got it when I was in my doctorate program. One of my professors gave it to me, and I love Winnie the Pooh, beautiful story, but this is a different philosophical approach that helps make meaning of just life lessons. Like, I think you'd love it just because you teach jujitsu and work through that. It was a very impactful thing about relationships and the presence and calmness and philosophical dynamics of through Winnie the Pooh, and I loved it.
How about this? We spoke about a lot. We spoke about trauma. We talk about moral authority, talking about empathetic engagement, culture, and climate. Dr. Hillary, if you could have everyone listening take just one lesson away from everything we discussed, what would that lesson be?
Oh, just be a good human. Like, really just slow down and be understanding that everyone is working through stuff and we're not gonna get it right all the time, and so just have a little bit of grace and empathy and hear people before we judge.
Everybody is fighting a battle you know nothing about, right? Like it's just it's
Mhm.
so true. A little empathy, it's great. Two fun questions to wrap up here. I asked this all the guests. How about this one? Dr. Hillary, if you could spend the day with anyone, alive or dead, famous or not famous, who would you spend the day with?
My grandfather, my granddad,
Awesome. Tell me about it.
um
Tell me about it.
yeah, he died when I was 20, and he was just, like, the coolest human, and I think I would just wanna sit with him. We probably would just literally sit and look at the lake, and, like, he always wore a white t-shirt and his jeans, and I think I would, like maybe he'd work on his car, like, I think I would just wanna sit in his presence, and I'd wanna learn from him. He was in World War II, he was, in the military. I would just like to learn his life a little bit more as an adult and just sit with him.
Yeah. So similar story. My grandfather passed years ago and World War II, and we found like his discharge papers, like after he died 50 years later. And he has all these medals in Army infantry in Europe. And no one, not even his wife, my grandma, knew how he earned those medals. Told nobody. There was a one story about how every like Bronze Star and combat, like Nothing. And it's so crazy. Would love to sit down with him. Like, dude, where'd you get this medal from? Tell me the
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be wild. Oh, last question. Dr. Hillary Cauthen, if you had to get a quote or a saying tattooed on your body, what would that quote or motto say?
I have one. I
Let's
have
go. Let's go.
I have 2, but this is my quote. It says, "My heart is your heart is my heart." And I say that to my 4 girls all the time because the first sound I ever heard from them was their heartbeat, and the first sound they ever heard from me was my heartbeat.
Ow. My heart is your heart is my heart. Out of maybe 160 guests, you're maybe only like the third person ever to have the quote already on their body.
Yeah.
That is outstanding. My heart is your heart is my heart is about as good as a spot as any to wrap this up. I'd like to end with a quote from your book. I kind of paraphrase a couple sentences I just loved. This is Dr. Hillary Cauthen. Hello, trauma, our invisible teammate. Here's a passage from her book. Coming forward and standing up for yourself is the most astonishing act of bravery. Refusing to go quietly, asserting one's right to safety takes courage that people who haven't experienced any trauma can barely imagine. What heroes do is so simple, yet so rare. They say, stop. This is not right. This is not okay. And I won't stand by and do nothing. The guest is Dr. Hillary Cauthen. The book is Holo Trauma, Our Invisible Teammate, available on Amazon and everywhere else. Dr. Hillary, so great to speak with you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on the show. Wish you continued success. And Dr. Hillary, people are looking for you and everything you do online. Where can we find you?
Yeah, Instagram, Dr. C Mindset for sure. You can also go to my website, which is www.txopps.com.
I'm going to put all of them in the show notes. But Dr. Hillary, continued success. And hey, let's stay in touch.
You have a great day.
Yeah, you
Bye.
too.